and facilitate this whole effort. So I think we have we're a smaller group, so why don't we go around real quick and introduce ourselves. And before we do that, how many folks have come to a kickoff event or the launch event? How many folks this is their first meeting for the Nova Washington? So just real quick, this is a planning design studio that we're in here. We have our whole sort of planning and design team in the back. A lot of the material you see up are different forms of input we've been getting during the meetings. I started Tuesday night over the course of the last day or so. So before you leave, make sure you look at the visual preference survey, which are these photos here. If you have any big ideas, we have another few boards in the back that we'd like to get your input on as well as the character district diagrams, which are the drawings on the back wall. So the whole point of this is to get as much input as quickly as possible from the community, draw that input, and then show you a drawing of that. And then so if there's some great ideas that come out of this meeting, come back to me tomorrow afternoon. We should have something of that hopefully drawn. You tell us if we got it right or we got it wrong, and then we'll redraw it and make it better. So the idea is that we're getting as many rounds of feedback on the issues at hand as we can. So.
What are you going to do? Are you going to give these to core? I mean, what's the point?
So I was going to just get there. We're charged with creating two documents, a vision plan, which is a plan that sets up the 20, 25, 30-year vision for the corridor. That is a guiding document that will... we're working with the city. So that will be a document that will guide the city, that will help them make decisions on land use, on zoning, on capital improvements, on city policy. And then the second piece of what we'll be delivering is a draft zoning code, and that will be for portions of the corridor and elements of the corridor. We'll be issuing several public drafts of both those documents during the fall and then into next winter. And then we hope to deliver a final draft of the zoning that will go before City Council around April of next year. So that's the process that we're in right now. So that, I think, just to orient us, we have some material to pull out to talk about. Really, this is meant for a discussion. So if folks in the back want to come up, there's more chairs sort of around the corner here. But I think real quickly, why don't we just name where you're from and just a sentence about why you're here, and we can just kind of go around.
I'm Marcy Burstyn-Hopper. I live on Cabot Street, and my main concern is that unintended consequences of making Washington Street better shouldn't end up throwing traffic to the neighboring quieter streets and therefore sacrifice a bigger area of Newton.
Thank you. Howard Rosenoff from Vincent Street. I have the same concern. In particular, my concern is with Watertown Street because it runs more or less parallel to Washington Street. As we improve Washington Street, I'm afraid that may throw more traffic onto Watertown Street, which is not designed for.
So one point of process, just as we have more people coming into the room, if someone's already said the sentence that you're here for, just what they said. And we'll keep going. Okay.
Jane Rosenbaum, I also live in this street together, so Howard said I think we're traffic in general.
I'm Bell Foz, I live on Page Road, and my concern is that there be a traffic study on Washington Street. Same concern.
Hey, Matthew Desi. I work across the street. I bike a lot, and since I spend at least 8 hours a day around here, just want to make sure it's as good as can be.
I am Mary Beth Danucci. I live on Penny Street, and we are already a cut through from Washington to Watertown, and I don't want to see it become more so.
Gordon Zerlip. I'm on Chestnut Street, a couple blocks up, but I'm also a member of the COA, which is the Council of Aging, so I'm looking out for the seniors here.
David Donahue, I'm from Tony's, and I live in West Newton. I'm just here to basically hope that we can have something done that makes sense and not rush and doesn't cost $1 billion.
Sergeant Bob Lee, using police traffic here all here to listen and learn to
Fred Arnstein from Newtonville.
I'm Barbara Fabricant. We live on Washington Park, and we have had lots of traffic and parking changes already in the last like 3 years. And I'm concerned about what else is going to happen as the apartments are built.
I'm Joan Talbot, Washington Park. I'm concerned about the traffic and the pedestrian traffic, because with all of these people coming in and using this neighborhood, there's going to be a lot of pedestrians. We already have a lot, and there's going to be a lot more. It's going to cause traffic.
I'm Tim Franklin from Newtonville and what's
I'm Andrea Kelly, 30-year resident of West Newton. I'm very concerned about parking issues in West Newton Square. I'm also a city councilor for Ward 3.
Richard Levine, Newton Center. I was just wondering to see if waiting to hold off any more development until Austin Street and the Warblocks finish, because just to continue on with what they're doing, it'll just be overload all at once, and you need to see the effects of what's going to happen, especially in the whole Washington Street area.
Gustavo Quiroga, this is Bergen.
Paul Anastasia, Newton Police Department.
Colleen Meinecker, I'm from the Newton Area Council. And I grew up in Toronto. I've seen this for 50 years going on there. What's happening here is way too fast. We've got to slow down this, not only the parking problems that will occur, but this building apartments in village centers is not a good idea.
Sarah Bidley in Woodville, and my comments have already been expressed.
Alyssa McGovern, I'm a real estate agent with Hammond. I'm just curious.
Leslie and I lived in Newton Corner, and I'm really concerned about the rapid urbanification of many villages in Utah.
Denise Flanagan, I work in West Newton and I live in Newton Corner, right behind where the new Sunrise 4-story development is going in, and all of these concerns.
I'm Stephanie Carter, and I live in West Newton, and I'm just very pleased to be able to participate. One, I like the idea of making Washington Street smaller and slower and more green, if there's a way to do it and still make sure the fire trucks can get through.
Hello, my name is Susan Rossler. I'm on the Newtonville Area Council. And I guess my concern is that nobody really has a plan to get people around Newton. We have very little public transportation, and it seems to me like removing parking spaces, you just can frustrate consumers and people who are shopping off the other street.
Peter Bruce from Newtonville, also on the Newtonville Area Council, concerned about too fast, excessive urbanization and social costs, and also the way that I think too much wishful thinking and lack of empirical study is going into a lot of the assumptions behind what's being developed.
Adeline Delaney, I live in Newtonville, and I'm hoping that it's not going to turn into Cambridge.
Allison Gray, I live in Newtonville.
Barbara Nix, I live on East Side Parkway, and even though I personally walk and bike everywhere, I feel that we really need Newton Finance public transit. It's the only way to get the cars off the street. They're adding thousands of apartments. Everybody's going to have cars, and we have to have finance transportation, and I'm not hearing anything about it from the city.
I'm Liz Preston. I live on Sterling Street in West Newton, and I've spent probably 30 years here having trouble going through the square because of traffic. And lately the parking has just gotten impossible. And I'm concerned that the bike lanes that are proposed are going to take away those parking spaces that we desperately need.
Peter Diamond, West Newton, also concerned about the lack of parking in West Newton Square in the area. It makes it hard for stores to be visited and places to stay in business, such as the space we're in now went out of business partially because there was not enough room for its customers to park. So I'd like to
see what the plans are for increasing parking in the area.
Hi, my name is David Roach. I'm with Mark Development. I manage our design and construction operations. I'm 15 years as a civil engineer and an avid cyclist, so I find this particular topic of interest.
Hi, I'm Jason Sobel, Director of Transportation Operations in the City of Newton DPW. Here to listen.
Mark Schuman from Newton Highlands, and I'm interested in hearing how we're going to preserve the economic investment of the residents of Newton.
I am Nicole Friedman. I'm the Director of Transportation Planning for the city.
I'm Bobby Sprode, and I'm a citizen, and I'm very concerned about development happening without allowing in front of parking.
Doug Knox, Newton Corner, etc.
Hello, I'm Tess. I'm with Kittleson Transportation Consultant.
Connor Semler with Kittleson, we're a transportation consultant.
Good evening, my name is Vanessa Farr, I'm with the principal.
Thank you, everyone. Lily, you can introduce yourself too.
Hi, I'm Lily Reynolds. I'm the city planning staff.
So, thanks for going through all that. It really helps us understand the roles in the room. How many people drove here? So we don't have a parking problem, we have a driving problem.
Parking problem too.
No. You got dropped off. Okay. All right. So how many people walked though? Okay. How many people rode their bike? Okay. Any other forms? Train? No. Well, I thought that was, I wanted to get a sense too about how people got here. So we've been just kind of pulling reports from some of the surveys that are up right now. And this one is kind of an interesting one to start with this conversation. But it's in direct opposition to this one. Because, if you kind of flip this conversation around, everyone, regardless of how they get around, eventually becomes a pedestrian. So, even if you drove here, how many folks parked in the public parking lot a couple blocks away? Just one? Where'd everyone else park? On the street. And then you walked over here, right? Was the walk a comfortable walk? No. No. Raise your hand if you felt good walking over here. So I think, if we kind of look at how pedestrians functions now, and then we start to look at all the other modes, that's an interesting way to approach the parking issue, which is also symptomatic of the driving issue. So how many people live within a half mile of where we are right now? So it's a sense of, how do we start to understand the ability to actually use those other modes and how that might affect parking. So then the other thing is we have heard from the number of the conversations we have that there are some parking issues both with supply as well as with access or habits around parking. I think they're different depending on West Newton or Newtonville and then even Newton Corner. So.
I want to frame that in terms of parking. I don't think the issue is parking right now. As much as parking, you have 2,000 extra apartments. So I think you want to just think about when you're talking, try and talk in terms of 2,000 more apartments.
Right. So that was right now what's happening, and then what's in store for the future, depending on the future. So that's a good question. So we'll get to that. I think. How many people would like to talk about the future parking issues around development? All about the future. Okay. So there's a topic that we wanted to ask about, which is really, I think, symptomatic of some of the parking both today as well in the future. And has anyone ever parked in the garage across the street? That's a trick question. So that's a lot of empty spaces just sitting there that are being unproductive. So there are planning best practices around sharing parking that aren't being used at all, we can tell so far in some of these village centers. So I don't know if it's a policy discussion with the owner. There's a lot of different ways that has to approach this subject, but the idea that you have parking facilities right now that are sitting empty during periods of time that they can be productive. So that's one piece of this puzzle. Do you have a comment about the shared parking?
I'm just wondering why you're focusing on parking. I think that most people talked about, they were concerned about traffic, and I'm just wondering why we're talking about parking rather than traffic.
We'll get to both. Yeah. So they're related in a sense of how people are getting around, and where. And part of the discussion, I think, is how do we how do we relieve traffic is by having people get out of their cars. So part of that is, are there other ways to getting from parts of town? So has anyone walked between here and say, you ever walk from West Newton to Cabot's High School? Like, is that a walk people do? So a sense of the traffic congestion is how much, and I'll pull these slides up in a second, but how much of the through traffic on Washington Street, people from going from other places to other places rather than the traffic of coming from places in Newton to places on Washington Street. And there's a tension there because we've asked that question about how important is Washington Street to traffic that's getting people through Newton versus how important is traffic for people that want to be in Newton and spend time in the places along Washington Street. So that's a discussion that we should have tonight as well. So to a process thing, if you have something to add on to that, a topic or a statement, so just put 2 fingers up and we'll come to you. So you're right.
I don't think that traffic that is going through along Washington Street is necessarily going someplace other than Newton. It's a major way to get from one end of Newton to the other end, to the middle of Newton. So just because you're doing through driving on Washington Street doesn't mean you're not staying in Newton.
A little bit about, yeah.
So one thing we're trying to understand better is how the experience of traveling along Washington Street changes throughout the day and based on what type of trip. So right now we're collecting data from live Google updates. You can go to Google and it says this trip will take 26 minutes now due to heavy traffic or something like that. We're going to have every 5 minutes we're pinging Google for a series of 8 or 10 different types of trips, like what you're describing, both from end to end of the corridor or from between a couple of the villages, or even who just are traveling north to south and cross on the corridor for a short segment.
I'm sorry, I just don't get it.
I think this is a piece of information that we're using to understand what's happening today to set the foundation for how we'll understand the future. We can't do everything. That can't be the question for everything right now.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
About a unit of analysis, what do you mean by Washington Street? Do you mean from Newton Corner through West Newton, or do you mean all the way up through Newton Wellesley Hospital, Lower Falls? Washington Street is what, 5 or 6 miles long, and are you just talking about these 2 miles down here, or are you talking about the whole length of Washington Street?
Good question. So for those who this is their first meeting, let me pull a map up, and we can at least get folks oriented. So we're looking at the stretch, and there's a map on this table, but for folks in the back, we're looking essentially at the Newton corner along Washington Street through toward Newtonville to this area around West Newton. So it's essentially the on-off ramp of the highway there and the on-off ramp of the highway here. So let's go in the front here and then we'll go to the back.
It wasn't so long ago when you could take the Mass Pike at no cost to go from West Newton to the Circle of Death at Newton Corner. And when they instituted the toll, or put the toll back, a lot of people switched from the turnpike to the exact corridor you're talking about.
That's interesting, yeah.
Not necessarily from
We used to go from West
I have 2 issues. First of all, there are 3 main
roads in Newton to go from any point to any point. One is Washington Street, one is Commonwealth Avenue, and the other is Route 9. Route 9 goes through Newton and Boston, but Washington Street also goes toward Watertown. So you have a lot of traffic, and to get to the Mass Turnpike, you do have a lot of traffic. But what I don't understand that you were talking about with garages, this garage here is only one garage on Washington Street that's housed, that's really for a small group of stores. Washington Street further down, as far as I know, doesn't have any parking garages. Where the bulk, a lot of traffic, and where most businesses are, and where you're intending to change a lot of things on Washington Street.
Where specifically? Can you give me a cross street?
Where you want it, where the whole block, where you want to do, what is it, a combination of residents and stores and stuff, by Walnut Street, Washington and Walnut. That's a heavily trafficked area. You have people going to Newton North. You have people on the transit. You are expecting many more residents there. And so you're talking about this parking garage, which really, I don't think has a lot of people during the day. If you're talking businesses, there aren't that many businesses. There are many more businesses further down.
So there isn't a parking garage over in Newtonville, is my understanding right now. So that is correct. I think there is.
There is yes, a private lot. There is a business that has a parking garage. I continue to be concerned about the fact that we're discussing an issue. The issue is all the traffic that will be coming. I mean, I don't think anybody started talking about this until
Well,
we talked about the development.
So the land use pattern, here is a land use pattern that's auto-oriented. So if future development were, let me just throw it in. Parking is related to how people get around. So if future development has lots of parking, it's going to induce the demand for auto ownership, and those people are going to drive. So by having new development that is targeted towards people who want to choose different ways of getting around, might own one car, might not own a car at all, is letting. So the question is, in a lot of places that are having issues like this, they're actually letting the market decide how much minimum parking to provide in a development project. And that's a question we have for this group, is to look at other ways of getting around. One way is to relieve development from the burden of supplying parking. And supplying parking is a way to shift people to other modes of transportation. We have a few hands. We'll come here, and then we'll go to the woman back.
One big unknown right now is the impact of Uber and Lyft and self-driving cars 10 years from now. And we're talking, everybody's in the present saying this is what's happening in the present, but we have to think about 10 years when people may not own two cars because everybody will be using Uber, Lyft, or whatever else comes along with self-driving cars and sharing cars rather than owning.
Yeah, so we had a couple other, we had a woman in the back there, they'll come up to you.
As a real estate agent who's grew up in Brookline and knows Newton really well, I love this area, but I work with a lot of people relocating, and it's tired. We need more reasons to come to Newtonville. It's a place that, in West Newton, you do one thing and you leave. It doesn't sustain you here, so I think that's a good thing. I think the general problem with traffic is the entire Boston area infrastructure. We weren't made for the amount of cars that we have, and we weren't made for bikes, and every day I'm detoured at least 3 times trying to get somewhere because of all the infrastructure work they're doing. And I think when that's alleviated, it will help. One thing that I think would be great, and I don't know if Newton has thought of it, is Lexington has a bus called the Lexpress that drives around Lexington and takes people to various places, and it's subsidized, it's free. So kids can leave high school and go to the rec center, and they can be taken home. There's one that goes to the Burlington Mall. So, we all have, we're based on the T and we're based on driving. We don't have good bus service here. I've probably taken the bus twice and I've been here since 1969. It's ridiculous. But if they're with a bus where you could go to West Newton and then maybe drop you at Whole Foods and then maybe take you to Newton Corner where you live, I think that would alleviate some of it. And also, there is Lyft and all that, but not every single person's going to take it. And I see a lot of young people don't have cars anymore. They're not driving. They don't even think about it. They don't care about parking when I'm selling condos to them and that sort of thing. So, but I think something that might be, that goes around town and takes you to Newton Center, and then, and it's on a little schedule. And they have that in lots of different, cities in the country, and Newton is huge.
We had it, it was not supported, it was stopped. So you might want it, but people don't use it.
So we have a few extra hands, but we have a lot of people here. I want to make sure the discussion's clear. So if you have something to say that's an add-on to a comment, just put 2 hands up. Appreciate the info.
So I just wanted to agree with these people. I remember not a few years ago, we did have a small bus system driving around, and whenever I look at it, it was empty because people just don't use that kind of transportation. They want to do things on their schedule and their route. And we had the experiment; it was very expensive, and we had to discontinue it. So just make sure everybody remembers that. The thing to me, in terms of the traffic, though, is the way I and my husband and my family have always used Washington Street, and what new residents are going to do. People are commuters. We rarely need to go to the barn or somewhere. We drive through Washington Street to get to 128. We don't take the circle of death by the Crown Plaza because it's too hard to get on the Pike there. So we drive out to pick it up by out in near the Con Ave. So I'm saying that, and I live near Center Street, where if you look at 4 o'clock, it's a parking lot going towards the Pike because people are coming from Needham to get onto the Pike. I think there's a lot of traffic that are people going through Newton, and I want to make sure that doesn't get misdirected so that it becomes one giant gridlock.
We had a couple other comments. Just an add-on or new topic?
Related to the comment about Uber and mass transit, Uber and Lyft are taking people in large numbers out of mass transit and putting a lot more cars on the road, so that's something we have to consider. This is something kind of an unintended consequence of anticipating a lot more Uber and Lyft vehicles.
That's correct. Uber and Lyft actually turn one trip into 2 trips, actually. If you're coming and going somewhere, you have to call an Uber to come to you and take you somewhere, and then to come to you and bring you back somewhere. You've doubled the number of trips on the road. My point is that middle-class people still really need their cars. We're busy. We may only have 1 car. We may have children that we have to pick up, drop off. We may have to get to work on time. Public transportation, waiting for it in the rain, is not something that we can do right now in Newton. Can't do it. We might not even be able to do it well in the city. Many of us are not young people without responsibilities or with a flexible job that we can just sort of, bike into, shower, and then go to work. That's a certain demographic, but it may not exist broadly in Newton at this time.
One, I think, of the issues is to figure out why it is that Lexington can support bus or shuttle type thing, and Newton could not. Maybe Newton was different 10 years ago. Maybe the population is aging. Maybe they biked more then or drove more then. There was a time when I used to bicycle too, but now I can't quite imagine using that as a real means of getting around Newton. I do want to have local transportation, and if there were a convenient way to run this thing, to wait for the bus in a covered place or whatever, then I would be able to use it. But I think you have to distinguish between the through traffic and the local traffic. They're 2 separate kinds of problems, and we don't really need to subsidize the through traffic, but we have to worry about it because it will mess up everything else that we do.
Yeah, I wanted to put this little on the right here, ability to drive quickly through Washington Street en route to Mass Pike or regional destinations. So slightly more than half of the folks who answered the survey so far think that's important or very important. So I think I wanted to share that with this in the context of this discussion. Sir?
All right, I'll throw out an idea. We put the big ideas somewhere around here?
Yeah.
All right, well, one of the big ideas I put up there was, why don't we just move Washington Street over the Pike and make that, you know, you can run the traffic through there as quickly as you want, and then on either side you put pedestrian shopping and so forth, so on. Well, I mean, if we have.
You get another follow-up to that?
What percentage of people in Newton have answered the survey? Is it above 1 or 2%?
I'll get you. We're about 800 people right now. So you're not the first person to suggest capping the like, but it's a very expensive proposition. So I just wanted to make I mean, if you look at in Dallas, they did a deck park that went over a highway, and when I looked at the math really quickly a few weeks ago, it was around $10 million an acre to do a park over a highway. You know, and we were talking about that earlier with the team, and said, well, that's in New England, it might be more than that. So that's the kind of number they're thinking with that big idea. I don't want to kill that idea because there might be some spots where that might be needed. I don't know. So,
we met with MassDOT the other day, and we talked about what it costs to go over. The cost is essentially a 40-story building is what you have to tolerate to break even on development over the Pike. So that then becomes a question, would we want 40-story buildings?
I was just putting the track.
Right, but so that, you know, if you want to break even on it.
well, just a sense of hands here. How many folks are concerned about regional traffic coming through Washington Street? So what's happened in Somerville is they've actually made a policy decision in certain places that they're actually going to pay more attention to the needs of the neighborhoods in those places within the city and less for the people who want to come from parts north to get to Kendall Square. So I'm wondering, in this context of this discussion is what are the compromises between regional traffic and what are the needs locally? And how, this gets to actually, what happens to the right-of-way along Washington Street? And one of the ideas we've been looking at is, are there locations where some of the bottlenecks that are happening, like at peak hour, sort of around this time of day or a little bit before this, is some of these bridges get backed up at the intersections for people trying to go north-south. And that might be people going, totally across town or just across the Pike from work. So we're trying to get a sense for that, but we're also looking at some of the best way to make traffic flow better is to actually open up the network more and actually have more connections and more connectivity. So the idea is, well, maybe it's not decking over the whole Pike, but it might be actually adding some additional connections across the Pike that are secondary or smaller neighborhood streets. Could even be pedestrian or bike. But the idea that if you provide more shortcuts, if you provide more connectivity, then you actually get less bottlenecking and less big pulses of traffic. So that's one of the ideas that we've been kicking around. What do people think of that? I see a couple hands in the back.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. We've got two or three policemen here. I'd like to know your perspective on what's going on with traffic and how you feel things are going to be as they talk about making Washington Street highway or at least denser.
Well, the corridor can't really accommodate the traffic it has now at peak hours. So
So any additional construction, whether it be businesses or apartments, it's just going to strain that system even more. So I know we're in the midst of getting ready to do West Newton over. We've been working on that for a year and a half maybe. When that goes through, there's a number of changes that have been put in there. There's been a lot of work done. We'll see if that works. Obviously, the synchronization of the lights, better bike and pedestrian access and safety is all going to help. West Newton, I think, is going to be a great test to see how this vision works. You know, sometimes during the day there's no place to park in West Newton. Sometimes at night there is, but on a Tuesday night, try to go to one of the restaurants. Sometimes you can't get into parking at all. So we're very much interested from a public safety standpoint. Our building is right here in West Newton. We've been here for years. We live it every day. So we're anxiously waiting to see how the West Newton project goes. But that being said, any additional development is going to bring more cars. I mean, you can think you have more bikes, you have more walkers, but people are going to bring cars. That's our perspective.
How you doing? You know, I've been talking enough times. I'm a big proponent of bikeways and bike paths, and I see this as a nice avenue to lessen that guy in the automobile. If he has a chance, a good opportunity to ride a safe bikeway, a major pathway, free of automobiles across the Mass Pike and along the Mass Pike. In fact, I'm looking for the Mass Pike to extend out into Alston, Cambridge as a major throughway, because there's a big complex being put in that zone, and I just see that as a connection that we want our people to be able to go into Harvard Square, into other bike paths, into Boston and the like. And if we can get people to use the bike paths and bikeways and over an automobile, we're greatly reducing our issues here at home, and we're reducing the greenhouse effect with automobiles. So let's look at that seriously. Thank you.
A couple follow-ups here. How does Somerville address the regional traffic, distinguish it between the regional and local traffic, and how will they eliminate it? You mentioned Somerville.
Yeah, so they did trip counts, Bluetooth data collection, and license plate collection to understand where people were coming from and entering an area and leaving an area. We're able to discern local trips versus regional trips, and then start to look at the capacity and the network around public space improvements that would directly benefit the adjacent neighborhoods in the city in itself, versus the adjustments to capacity to handle keeping the regional traffic coming through. And this is in the context of a couple different spots in the city. So they made a policy choice to focus on, rather than having flyover areas where people just cruising through, to actually create some places that people wanted to spend time, actually feel comfortable as destinations. And I think there's some, just spending some time here the last few days and walking around Newtonville and Newton Center a lot. A few of our team is staying at the Crown Plaza. These are hostile environments for pedestrians. Even if you're driving there, parking, and want to go to one of the businesses or go to the haircut. So there's an inherent kind of auto-oriented design. It's so close to the Mass Pike that I think over the years, Washington Street has been thought of as part of the highway system and not a piece of the neighborhood structure of this part of Newton. And I think that's something that we're puzzling with as a planning team. They kind of get a sense, are you okay with this still being a part of the highway system, or should this be more part of, should Washington Street feel differently when you're in West Newton, feel differently when you exit West Newton and head into Newtonville? Should there be different characters of Washington Street as you travel along a couple miles of its stretch?
Sure,
So,
but I was asking, what did Somerville do to address that problem? I understand how you data-driven analysis, but did they choke the road down? Did they choke it down to one lane? Let's say up at 16 or 28 to force people under 95? Is that the thought process here?
Not exactly. What Somerville and many communities are realizing is anytime we add traffic capacity, we invite more traffic through our community. It's happened everywhere there's demand, like a place like Boston metro area. So instead of thinking about the delay through a corridor and how much traffic is dealing with, they're taking the reverse approach. What do we want this street to be for our community? And so Russ talked about some of the open space improvements they opted to make instead of adding more traffic lanes or adding more turn lanes. And so I think as we're thinking about this corridor for our community here, we should we should worry about what we want it to be, because it's going to be congested no matter what we do. We could add 2 lanes on each side of the street, and in 10 years or 5 years, it's going to be exactly as congested as today, because more people will just pop off the pike and use Washington Street. So the opportunity here and the approach that communities like Somerville and many others are taking is, with the community, with you all in this room, what is the ideal vision for this corridor, for the businesses, for the residents, and for the town, for the city, excuse me. And then we design for that future, recognizing there's going to be delay at certain times of day. We can't avoid it.
So a couple of follows, but I don't know who had their hand up first. Why don't we go here, 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 here.
Thanks. I've done this kind of thing for 37 years before I retired, and I wish I am enjoying the discussion and the comments, but until you have numbers that tell us how many people are going through Newton to get to the other side, we're talking about ifs, and I think you have an audience that is quite sophisticated about the impacts. The thing is, if Washington Street gets too plugged up, people are going to show up all over the other streets. So without a sense of numbers, we don't know what that means.
Yeah, so we're at the kind of beginning of that conversation in a sense. So, but to kind of double up on the question that you asked about what a place like Somerville do. So they've actually removed minimums for development for parking. They've set maximums for certain areas. So in a neighborhood center like Union Square, they're saying there can only ever be this many parking spaces. And why did they do that? They did that so that they could make a comparison. So we actually want people to use other forms of transit. In order to do that, we have to actually force the habits of the people that are in that area to either own one car or not own a car. And why did they do that? Because we're in New England, we have narrow rights of ways. It's not like we're going to knock down a block or two to widen roads. You know, that's not happening anymore. So the idea that we actually, if we're going to manage congestion, like Connor said, it's not adding lanes, because that actually has been demonstrated you have the same traffic congestion that's happening. What you're not doing when you add lanes is actually creating a finer grained network of not just all types of streets, but a finer grained network of modes of transportation, which is biking, walking, and transit. Rideshare is a totally new thing that most cities are still trying to wrap their head around. But the idea is that in places like Somerville or these constrained cities that are around Boston, is looking at how we can start to manage mode share so that if I don't know what the number is, but if 80 or 85 or 90% of Newton folks are driving a car, well, in 10 years, when we get to 70%, 10% of those folks are getting around in other ways. And that's actually bringing cars off the street and helping with congestion. So that's part of the way that parking is related to this whole equation, is we can start to look at how we can use parking as a way to, from a policy standpoint, to affect future trips. And that's what it comes down to.
From a local standpoint, but that analysis doesn't address the communities coming from.
No, I think it's related where well, this gets back to another comment that came up is, the best way to phrase it is there's good congestion and bad congestion, just like there's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. So in a place like Newtonville, you actually, some of these businesses thrive on people that are coming through and saying, oh yeah, I've got to get something at CVS, or I've got to pick up stuff for a meal tonight, or I've got to get a haircut, or there's these things that happen in main streets that are more conducive when you actually have some friction on the street, which friction is a better way of saying cars are slowing down, there might be some congestion. So there's good congestion in main streets that we might actually want. In most main streets, the police gentleman in the back said a lot of the intersections aren't functioning. In most main streets, you actually want the grade on the intersection to be at an F usually, so that it actually is slow-moving cars. You actually, if cars are cruising through and going at high miles per hour speeds, that actually can detract from retail sales and vibrancy of main street areas. So this is where this traffic discussion has to be very sensitive to the context of where we are along Washington Street. So we had a couple other hands that were up to, we'll go here and there.
Getting back to the issue of bike lanes, painting a line down the road is not a safe bike lane. What you need to put up is basically concrete barriers between the cars and the bikes. Because anything short of that, I've been driven off the road numerous times. It's not safe. And you're not going to get people riding their bikes in an urban setting until you put up some physical barriers between the cars and the bikes and the pedestrians, which means on Washington Street, you have to reduce the number of lanes. That's it.
Well, that's a good comment. We're going to come back to that during the ride, bike, walk, ride, bike tomorrow morning. So we'll dive into that in more detail. But I want to share a slide later. We'll come back to that. So we'll put a pin in that.
So you have two categories, local, where you go Newton to Newton, and regional, people going through. And I think that important third category, considering you're upping the population of Washington Street, is semi-local. In other words, people who live in Newton who are commuting into Boston or commuting out to Framingham, and you're increasing this population, and I think that's another category that's sort of different than either of the two you're talking about.
That's the local commuter. They're going to have local trips, but they're also going in and out of the city. Yeah, that's a good point. So we had a hand over here, and then we'll head back to this.
I wonder how many people are using Washington Street instead of getting on the Mass Pike, and because Washington Street seems so much like a highway, it's sort of an analogous road that just doesn't have a toll. One thing that I think would be great for Washington Street in general in terms of its aesthetics would be to put a solid barrier between Washington Street and the Mass Pike for sound and just visual. Right now it's just a chain link fence, and it kind of emphasizes that sense that it's part of the highway.
So this condition here, yeah. We have some sketches we're actually working on, so we have time, I'll pull those out. So we have lots of guys. I think you were next, and then the two in the back, and then we'll come over here. Wait, who has an add-on to that topic?
I have a direct add-on to that comment.
Okay, great. So we'll go on that order.
So living here, pretty much down the street from where you're showing for 38 years, the parallel of here and the Pike, people absolutely see it as an extension of the Turnpike, and the speeds at which people travel are ridiculous. And the fact that the whole aesthetic, and I was on a committee, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, that went absolutely nowhere, that was supposed to, we worked with a whole planning committee of people from one of the local universities, and nothing ever happened. They didn't do any planting, they didn't fix the fence, but it's absolutely what you said, that people think they're on the Turnpike and they're driving 60, 70 miles an hour, and that's no exaggeration. Down a residential, street, so that has to change.
So half of Commonwealth Avenue in the Back Bay fits on Washington Street, just giving people a sense. So we've been looking for precedents of where, the width of Washington Street is quite wide in parts, and it's directly related to how people are traveling so fast. And so we've been looking for other streets around the region and other streets nationally that have characteristics that might be more appropriate or more in the context of Washington Street. Because if we look at the number of trips that are on portions of Washington Street, it is oversized. There's 14,000 to 16. So it's 14 to 16,000 depending on where you are in the middle range, and then at peaks it gets to around 25,000, 26,000 cars at the sort of on-ramps to the highway. So in the context of number of car trips per day, and I know people, it's not a lot for this width of road. We've got width of pavement in certain areas here. This is 4 lanes, and
So that's exactly your point when you're saying that the widening, they found is detrimental. That's, we already have it. Why?
well, that's 50, almost 50 feet for 4 lanes of traffic. That's. We had a couple other hands, one there, and then we had one here.
I just hope that while you're considering Washington Street and different modes of transportation on it, that you consider the commuter rail. It's a very fine transportation system to get wherever it stops. That I personally have a very hard time getting down to it because it's a very frightening and isolated stairway in Newtonville.
That.
Exactly. And at this time, it only runs commuter hours, which when I need to go to Boston, I try to adapt to that. But I think if the train was approachable and inviting and perhaps had more trips and more stops, that might help.
So I just want to add on to that comment before we come up. Well, let's do this one, and then I want to kind of tie a few of these comments together.
I just have one comment. I've heard it from quite a few times, the dynamics between Mass Pike and Washington, and adding the toll in, increased traffic on Washington Street. I just know that a year ago, I went to a bunch of these hearings about the tolls, and MassDOT was going to be studying this and the impacts of adding that toll, and I was curious if you've actually, if anyone has seen that data. I mean, I'm sure that since nothing came up of it, they decided there was no impact, but I just think that that data might be available if people are curious about it.
Oh, Rachel has it. Yeah.
There's a 6 months after implementation report.
Come on.
They did do a 6 month after implementation report on the all electronic tolling, and they found that there's a 7 minute, at the 6 month point, there was a 7 minute time savings, roughly, from 128 into downtown, on the Pike.
No, I'm just curious, they add traffic to Washington. I thought they were studying. I think they studied these.
So we had, I think we had one more hand in the back. So, I know I was going to come back. Oh.
Yeah, there's been a little bit of an image of Washington Street as being something of a speedway. I drive a cab, and I drive on it all the time. People do speed, and it's often a problem, but if you look at the record over the last, from 2007 to 2015, the Metropolitan Planning Organization found that there were no fatalities on Washington Street. Of course, we did have a tragic accident at Sweet Tomatoes not too long ago, but that was not really a traffic accident, but there were no fatalities, and Washington Street's crash rate is about average compared to other cities in District 7, which is what this organization categorizes us within.
So I think we look at crash data, we're looking at that too, but it's also a sense of, that's a bus stop. So this actually gets back to, there was a conversation this morning we had around housing and affordability, and the idea that right now in Newton, I think if you don't have a car, you actually probably struggle to get around, because you have to cross, you have to take the express bus into downtown, you've got to cross this section of street, which is fairly inhospitable. So and from an equity standpoint, we need to start to look at the transportation solutions in the way that we integrate the traffic demand for cars and how it relates to the demand for transit. And then that relates to, if we can have a family go from 2 cars to 1 car, that's $8 to 10 grand back in that family's pocket from savings on automobile maintenance and operations. That number comes from AAA, and so one of those things where affordable living might be has to integrate into this transportation conversation. So that's we've been talking a lot with the team about how do we improve access to bus stations, bus stops, and then related to that, coming back to the transit conversation, is, right now it's somewhere between, we've heard the number 48 million to 55 million to improve the 3 stations kind of in this stretch of Washington Street, to add ADA, handicap accessibility, to improve the platforms and all, and that's a big number. We were talking earlier, team, and maybe to do this stretch of Washington Street with kind of gold-plated bicycle infrastructure might be a $4 to $5 million number. So, we're kind of really kind of at a concept level looking at some of these improvements, but the idea here is also, are there ways that we can add on multiple solutions all at once to start to think about how we can make comprehensive improvements, and looking at, the berm here, the chain link fence, and that's unproductive land to a certain degree. So how can we start to look at how that integrates into future Washington Street, whether it's more bus rapid transit lanes, or more bicycle facilities, or even more park space that's sort of a mitigating buffer to the highway. And then how can that start to integrate into new station platforms, station head houses with elevators coming down, so that whole kind of multimodal puzzle starts to fit together in places. So that's a question we have. We're starting to do some sketches on it. So we have a couple of hands. So why don't we come, one here, one in the back, and then we'll come over to you. Really making a cold one around.
Thank you. Just on the subject of commuter rail, it's pretty clear that the system is at capacity right now. There aren't going to be any more trains, at least, among other things, until there are more tracks at South Station. Ironically, they took a lot of the tracks out, built the post office sorting center. Now there's talk about taking the sorting center down, putting the tracks back. Until that happens, the system is what you see is what you're going to get. The system is at capacity.
Then we had a comment in the back there.
Yes, you had that last photo showing the rail, the Mass Pike, the rails and the like. Now, we were to take advantage of some of that dirt, so to speak, and make that bike path with fencing and the like, and potentially even allow for kiosk-type facilities where small businesses could actually take advantage of rest stops or coffee spots or different key points where they interconnect with other major bikeways and pathways to other parts of the city that would, again, alleviate the people's need for an automobile and have a safe transit point. And that's why I started seeing the Mass Pike and the so-called fence that's there with all those terrible bushes. If we could take advantage, again, putting fencing up further back, allowing kiosk-type facilities to be put in those locations, and the bike paths on that turf. So we have a whole opportunity to grab that land and do something very useful. So our small businesses, kiosk-type operations, community activities, the list goes on and on. And I just think we're using it wrong. We need to take advantage of that space and use it well.
Have you ever walked there? It's so loud. You can't hear yourself.
Again, when you put that kiosk and you put a big sound barrier wall in that spot,
that you can say.
We're going to combine multiple efforts.
So there's, the Pike is a problem. This is, from a noise standpoint, from an air quality standpoint, from a general, there's lots of issues. It's not going anywhere, so I think we're looking at everything. Well, is it sound wall someplace? Is it planting someplace? I think there's a whole list that we're starting to sketch out of ways to mitigate issues in the Pike.
I'd like to respond to that in particular. You mentioned that it was air quality concerns about bikers and the like. We have no qualms about putting high-density homes and filling it with people who have essentially affordability issues and put their lives in jeopardy. We know for a fact that if you're on the Mass Pike area within a half mile, a quarter mile actually, you have a 30% chance of having a stroke or a heart attack over the norm. That's a given. There's a lot of studies out there. You can just go Google this information, and you realize that they're at jeopardy. So why do you think that high density is a good solution at these locations? And yet you're going to poke your finger at a biker on a bikeway for 10 minutes, 20 minutes on a bike doing 10 miles an hour or better on a 2-mile road. you know.
So I can answer that question because it asked that question. I'm actually sit on the Air Pollution Control Commission in Boston, so I'm familiar with this subject. And a lot of the new buildings you're seeing coming up in parts around the freeways around Boston all have HEPA filtration in there for dealing with small particulates. So there are ways to do it in smart in buildings that people are integrating into construction. So that's happening as we're seeing all of these buildings happening close to highways and close to higher traffic corridors. So we have a bunch of hands, but I wanted to come back to you. You had one a little while ago, and then we'll come back to a couple in here. And then we're getting real close on time. We're actually a little over, so we'll try and move quickly here. Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on the unproductive land comment that you made, and that green little nugget that's in there. If you go back to the map, there's a part where Washington Street kind of bulges out, and it's got that green spot that's right next to the highway. Why not flip that to the other side of the street and make that a neighborhood park that people can actually use?
What do people think of that idea? Does anyone spend any time in that green space now? So no one would be upset if we start to think about other ways to reconfigure that land. Okay, we'll come back later. I have a couple comments in the center here. We'll start to think about different options for how to better use that.
In Natick, around the off-ramps or on-ramps, they have solar panels. I wonder if we couldn't do that and maybe help reduce our billion-dollar deficit in that unused space around the railroad tracks. Railroad tracks north-facing side, I think.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I just want to say that I think that all your ideas for reducing the traffic and making things local are really good. I just hope that you keep in mind the 5,000 extra apartments. That's where I get confused. Like I love the idea of slowing everything down, and so I'm just confused about what happens when we add all the apartments. You know what I'm saying? If we're talking today, I think all this stuff sounds fabulous.
Yes. What do we do with those new trips? I understand. So we'll dig into that a little more. Yeah. That's good. That's good. Thank you.
Hi, I just want to say that this roadway has been there from time immemorial, and the amount of population has only increased. I have a suggestion, I don't know if it's feasible, that there could be somewhere an express lane that bypasses the local Washington Street. If someone is going from the beginning by Newtonville or by the, Suicide Circle, and going to the other end toward the Mass Pike.
Isn't that called the Pike?
No, well, it is, but it's, no, because you cannot go on to Route 16 from the Mass Pike if you're on from one of the directions. You cannot get over there, it has to be local.
That's right. We know that here at this end, you can only go in or out.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. It's commuter only. Yeah. So I have one last image I'm looking for, but I want Lily to kind of wrap this up for a second.
So I just want to do a little PSA for stuff that's coming up tomorrow and later this week. So actually, first things first, later tonight, we want to stick around about 20 minutes. We're going to dive into a similar discussion about public life and public spaces. So I really love that description of that part, the little green nugget. So I think we should maybe temporarily at least rename it that. I wrote it on big ideas back there. So we'll be talking about public life and public spaces. Tomorrow morning, right here, we're going to have a business roundtable at 8 a.m. Some of the businesses from Washington Street are coming. You're welcome to come to that. Following that, we have a walk, bike, ride, drive discussion at 9 a.m. And following that, a optional 1-hour bike tour at 10:15, BYO bike, and also a concurrent walk audit with some of our colleagues at Walk Boston, which is a really great organization based out of Boston. They're coming here and they're going to do a walk audit here, and you're welcome to come out with us and walk around for an hour. On Saturday, we have another topic session, Creative Arts and Culture on Washington here at 11 a.m. and then Understanding Form-Based Codes and Zoning at 3 p.m. on Saturday. On Sunday, things are going to be really fun over at Family Access back here. We're having a community block party and the midpoint check-in. So that's an opportunity for all of the design team that's been working back here during this discussion, and we'll keep working to bring all of the plans and ideas forward and get your feedback on Sunday before we round out the rest of the week. So that starts at 1 o'clock right across here at Family Access at 492 Waltham Street. And then our wrap-up is on Tuesday night. It's 5:30, we're going to have some chili, and at 6 p.m. We're going to have a presentation and conversation at 150 Jackson Road, which is the former appliance, a little closer over to Newton Corner.
So just to conclude here, there was a couple comments that were made that jog my memory about some designs we did. This is 93 coming in on Mystic Avenue, coming into the city, just near Somerville. But this is the current condition. One of the mandates there was how do we create cheaper space for small startups, fabrication, arts uses and all, and better use more productively the land under the highway. Everything from container farming to art space to fabrication space. But then it also came up in the context of how do we mitigate the issues of the highway adjacent to the Winter Hill neighborhood that this was in, is we actually create a solar PV array and a sound barrier wall along the whole stretch of that highway. And this is actually an adopted version of the plan, and that's part of their comprehensive plan now for the city. So we had started to think around the lines of how can we sort of have real holistic solutions to Washington Street at the edge of the highway that might integrate all these sorts of various systems. So if you have other crazy ideas like that, let us know, because when we drew this on a napkin during that charrette a few years ago, we didn't think it was we thought it was a crazy idea, but now it's adopted city policy. So I wanted to share that just in the context of this discussion and kind of make sure you come back to all that great stuff that Lily just told you about. So thanks for all the time, everyone. I appreciate it.